Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I would like to share with you my review of the Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. I find myself coming back to this series of movies time and time again, and I enjoy watching it every single time. I think this is both the best and worst interpretation of this famous character, and in this video I will do my best to explain why. Let's start with the first movie, Batman Begins, released in 2005. This is the weakest and riskiest entry of the series. It feels like the director had his own clear vision of Batman as a character, yet he either had commitment issues or some external influences, so he ended up bouncing between the comic/sci-fi approach and the more realistic nitty-gritty take on Batman. The story begins with a basic retelling of the Batman parents' story and portraying Bruce as an anger-driven traveler who seeks to learn all sorts of ropes from street hustling to fighting, who eventually grows into an absolute fighting unit. His path eventually leads him to Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows, which to me is arguably the weakest part of the film. You see, the concept of this league and its leader works as long as it mostly exists in your imagination. There is nothing really Christopher Nolan could do that would be both quick and live up to the name alone, the League of Shadows. And so the entire training and compound sequence just feels off and wonky. And though I don't agree with the League of Shadows sequence, I think the ideas it delivers are fantastic. This is where the Batman fast-tracks the establishment of his values, methods, and boundaries. So one might claim that the League of Shadows is worth the trade-off alone thanks to this fast track, but then someone else might say that this first movie should have been dedicated to this character creation. But in any case, it's over pretty quick, and we move back to the more realistic setting of Gotham and the factual introduction of Batman. We get a Guy Ritchie-like sequence of Bruce and Alfred working together on the actual creation of Batman, which changes the pace and the tone of the movie quite a bit. Now it's more dynamic, and yet we remain ephemeral since the Batman is devised like a symbol, a beacon, rather than a blunt weapon. At the same time, we get to meet our antagonists for this movie, the Mafia boss and the mad scientist. And while Falcone fits the mold of the realistic Batman quite well, a correct uber-powerful gangster holding the city in his iron grip, Dr. Crane is still more of that League of Shadows cartoony wonkiness. Crane most definitely could have been developed a bit more. The character is both menacing and charismatic. But while his mask, his demeanor and the gas are horrifying, the application of it not so much. I think either the effect of the gas should have been considerably stronger or maybe even irreversible. Alternatively, Batman should not have been subjected to it and only observed secondary or tertiary characters suffering from it. Just like with the League of Shadows, a movie that aligns itself more with the real world than a largely made-up sci-fi universe, does much better, relying on imagination through vague concepts and descriptions. And so observing both the League of Shadows and Dr. Crane's abilities from afar but never quite experiencing them would have been much more impactful. In any case, this movie has plenty good stuff in it, so let's switch back to that. I think the character of Batman is done well. The director clearly knew how he wanted to execute it, and so it's quite consistent. The Batman is very down-to-earth, he's very human. The Batman is literally built and trained, and so at first he makes rookie mistakes and is even a little clumsy. But the intimidation and brutal force is there, and so the unstoppable force gets established. There is even an attempt to portray Batman as a cunning and subtle detective, but unfortunately this movie fails to incorporate this angle consistently. In any case, Batman evolves into the geared-up nemesis, gains his most reliable ally, and the culmination of the movie is the standoff between the very real and determined League of Shadows and the Batman. The final sequence is both janky and great. I think some of the visuals depicting the effects of the toxin are fantastic, but at the same time, most of the elements feel cartoonish, not very well thought through, and definitely not serious enough. For example, the poisoned water supply. As the train moves through the city, it already boils water along the path, so why isn't there mass hysteria and destruction? Also, the train itself looks like something out of a steampunk game or movie, rather than the dark reality that is Batman and Gotham, just out of place. Nevertheless, the good guys win and Bruce remains firmly in charge of his corporation and even cleans out the house. So to summarize this movie, it is a conflicted introduction. Let's move on to the second installment in the series. The Dark Knight, released in 2008. There are no more conflicts in the setting or execution. The Dark Knight is firmly set in reality, with artistic liberties allowing Batman to be a superhero. The slightly wonky cartoonish enemies are replaced with one of the most elaborate villains ever portrayed on the big screen, Heath Ledger's Joker. The character and the particular depiction of it are both rightfully iconic and have been covered at the greatest of extents already. To me, the Joker is particularly appealing due to his immaculate planning and intellect that are mixed with severe psychological trauma, which in turn is spectacularly masked and used against his targets. This movie also handles its complex situations in quite an interesting manner. It does not rely on the viewer making their own conclusions, it instead clearly presents and states those. But because those conclusions are contained within very carefully crafted and flawlessly executed phrases and speeches, they are fairly easy to accept. In any case, by the second movie, the character of Batman is very well established within the universe, and he has successfully eradicated the basic baddies, your thieves, killers, politicians, and other crooks. The next step is psychological warfare. The Joker is not just a genius psychopath whose sole goal is to raise hell. He is also, as it was put in the movie, an agent of chaos, pure chaos. So far, Batman and his allies built their world through sheer brute force, and the Joker is here to demonstrate how little that matters and how fragile their actual state of things is. But more on that later. We are also introduced to Harvey Dent, the sole beacon of hope that both Gordon and Batman put their bets on as the future of Gotham. Harvey Dent is introduced as someone fearless and quite clearly full of himself. A showman who seems to have been in the zone their entire life. They've achieved great heights, the Lady Luck seems to be constantly at their side, and their moral code is as clean as a whistle. And there seems to be no one better than Harvey Dent to usher Gotham into the new crime-free world. But more on that later as well. Going back to Batman. Even though he's of course our protagonist, no one can argue that his story and arc in this movie are secondary to that of the Joker and the psychological warfare. The Joker of course steals the show, but not only as the character on the screen, the ideas he brings to the fore are complex and intriguing. We first see him as part of the bank heist opening sequence, and we see the Joker as the absolute mad planning genius. There are redundancies to the redundancies, the compartmentalization that some federal agencies would be jealous of, and the military timing of the entire operation. Then the Joker shows the remaining crime bosses how little their brute force matters and what the influence levers are. As the movie develops, the Joker's act becomes significantly more elaborate and his psycho mask grows proportionally. But you'd be wrong to think he loses control. Quite the contrary, Joker's plan grows into the city-wide control and manipulation. As he puts it in the movie, all it takes is just a little nudge. And the Joker means two simple nudges. One nudge to show that every person in this city is essentially as evil and selfish as he is, a value nudge. The other nudge is to show that the best of them is no better than the worst, at the balance of good and evil, the yin and yang. Just like Batman's belief in a crime-free Gotham, Joker's belief that everyone is as messed up as he is proven wrong by the other. You cannot eradicate crime, and the harder you try, the harder it will fight back. As you continue to elevate your measures, the response will continue to evolve. Similarly, there are those who made mistakes and were dealt a shit hand in life. Their lives aren't peachy, but they are good people whose values rival those who claim to be honest and civil. And inmates versus civilians two-ship situation is a lovely metaphor of relativity of both good and bad. While the second nudge is much more clear-cut. You see, the zone is quite an awesome place to be in. You're on a roll, you're winning, you're getting it done. But the higher you fly, the harder you fall. None of the good guys in this movie are as perfect as they think they are, and they get played like trumpets. Batman loses his head with Rachel and gets tricked. Dent gets knocked down and immediately loses his ability to think straight and logically, and Gordon tries to outsmart the truth. And though you might think the first notch is considerably riskier as it heavily relies on a chance that someone or a group of people are simply bad, it's the second notch that ends up working out perfectly for the Joker. But the people aren't really that bad, and those who are the loudest often lack the cojones to commit. While those who made mistakes and paid the price aren't simply bad, it is just not as simple as the Joker would like it to be. But at the same time, hoping there is a white knight, a silver bullet is just not going to work out. The better and cleaner you are, the further off balance you get. The traits and strengths that make you great can be turned against you either by chance or through malicious intent. As Alan Moore put it, all it takes is just one bad day to reduce the sanest man alive to lunacy. The good guys lose in this movie, but instead of facing the harsh reality, they choose to fool the world, and it leads to a spectacular conclusion of this trilogy. The Dark Knight Rises, released in 2012. It's been 8 years since the events of The Dark Knight, and the largely crime-free status of the Gotham City is based on a house of cards, built at the cost of Gordon's pretentious lie and Batman's exile. The imbalance we spoke about in the second movie had been turned up to 11. The movie opens up with Gordon contemplating his come clear speech. By now, his character has been deconstructed so much that it's nearly revolting to see his contemplation. How far has he come from the righteous, selfless policeman we observed and respected in the first two movies? But this lie is not only disgusting as an idea, in actuality it makes Gotham complacent. This lie gave Gotham a false sense of security, and so we meet the ultimate embodiment of the reality, Bane. He's as crazy, cunning and driven as all the good and bad guys before put together. His speeches cut deep, he does not play around or pretend. The longer you live in a lie, the harder the truth will hit you. But more on that later. We also get to meet the Catwoman, lethal, deceiving and beautiful. A match not only for Bruce but for Batman as well, who in turn has been living in hibernation since the last film. The Batman essentially had given up, and there are two new characters in this movie to bring him back. Selina Kyle as a prospect of the future that consists of a normal-ish life, and John Blake as the reminder of the reasons and ideals that drove Bruce to create Batman and as a successor. But of course, debts have to be paid and the future has to be earned. And while in the second movie the fight between Batman and Joker was referred to as an unstoppable force versus an immovable object, I think it applies here much better. Bane is the ultimate pragmatic force, while Batman is forced to strip down all the veneer, lies, and even his gear and face his nemesis face to face and hand to hand. It is fantastic how the lines of Alfred in this movie bring up the most basic inner drivers and values that created Batman. The price of victory over Joker cost Bruce himself and the Batman. It even cost him his lifelong companion, Alfred. Everyone thought that they knew better, everyone thought they could outsmart the truth. Of course, in an effort to defend his city, Bruce comes back to action with a firm belief, and probably rightfully so, that he will prevail over whatever enemy that's coming after his city this time around. And that is where we see Batman get knocked down harshly from his throne. Bane doesn't just physically prevail during their first face-to-face, he completely negates everything that Batman still remains. There is no more tricks and graceful maneuvers like we saw in the second movie. Brutal pragmatism prevails. The deepest secrets are unceremoniously revealed. But before we look at the second part of this movie, I would like to take a minute to preface my take on it. I absolutely love the version of Bane created by Christopher Nolan and portrayed by Tom Hardy. The lines, the actions, the ideas behind him are mesmerizing. Plus, I simply like to see consistent and complex characters on the screens. I also appreciate and understand the idea that Bane represents in this film, the absolute despise towards the establishment, anarchy, and the cult of personality. And I think from this point on in the movie, both Batman and Bane are executed well, except for the situations they are in, and especially when they have to face off one last time. Batman getting knocked down hard, both mentally and physically, and having to rebuild himself literally from the bottom of the pit is an awesome storyline. It is full of emotion, struggle, drive, and storytelling that ties in old connections. Bane taking over the entire city in a very explosive manner and preaching his ideas around is a very sobering lesson in hard truths and realities. But ultimately, Bruce somehow heals a dislocated vertebrae, climbs out of the pit, a feat that only one person before him managed to accomplish successfully, gets into the city and rekindles the revolution. It's just a bit too funky. Even with all the artistic liberties I've seen in the series so far, I just find it hard to fully buy into this sequence of events. While at the same time, Bane and his army of goons bring the entire city to its knees. They somehow keep alive thousands of cops trapped underground, they don't get infiltrated by some military black ops and dismantled from the inside. There is rioting, but it seems that only ultra-rich are affected by it and not the entire population. There seems to be some sort of social justice tribunal run by Bane's crew and Dr. Crane, and when we finally see the streets, well, they seem to be pretty clean. I would expect them to be more akin to something like The Division 1 or 2. In any case, the Batman comes back and rekindles the fire of revolution against the oppressive dictatorship of anarchy. The final standoff between cops and the free people is difficult to follow or accept. Where are the regular civilians? Where are the majority of people affected by this entire debacle? If they are with Bane and his crew, then aren't cops and Batman the bad guys here, and how would they have been allowed to survive that long? If they are with the cops, well, then the opposite is accurate. Bane and his crew would have failed long time ago. You are not talking about a classic bank robbery that involves hostages. It's an entire fucking city that's kept hostage. They just can't feasibly keep it tightly locked for any period of time. Anyway, the battle breaks out and in the midst of it, Batman faces off with Bane one last time. Of course, Batman is now his old self and wins at first. And then the dismantling of Bane truly begins. In just a short few minutes, Bane is turned from a criminal cult leader mastermind into an absolute simp. I do not understand why Talia's reveal had to demean Bane into absolute pulp. All the horrifying actions and deep-cutting speeches are reduced to simping. I think Christopher Nolan had a clear idea regarding how he wanted to depict and develop the characters of Batman, Bane, Gordon, and Alfred. Yet either got stuck or forced into putting them into some poorly choreographed or thought-through situations. I'm glad nonetheless that this depiction of Batman gets the happy ending and the idea of sacrificing yourself gets concluded with a reasonable handoff, but I'm also gutted that such a well-developed and portrayed villain as Bane gets unceremoniously discarded. Overall, I think this is a fantastic trilogy. It's pretty far from the sci-fi, more traditional Batman, but this take on the character has a clear vision and does a decent job creating a world that is very close to reality. While I was working on the script, I also decided to rank these three films, which is not something I normally do, but I will try to provide my reasoning as well. Batman Begins is number 3. It's not a movie I would watch again unless as part of a marathon of sorts or to refresh my memory for something like this review. It's just too inconsistent and weird if you watch it in isolation. To me, it serves as an introduction to the series, nothing more. The Dark Knight Rises is number 2. The plot holes, the inconsistencies, and other issues I mentioned before are easily outweighed by the fantastic characters and engaging story. This movie is worth watching for Bane alone, while it also gives the character of Batman a happy ending and Catwoman steals the show every time she's on the screen. And that leads us to The Dark Knight. It is undoubtedly the best movie in the series. It is one of the best realistic superhero movies ever. It's not the best Batman movie by a long shot, but it is definitely the best Joker movie. It's the kind of film that I can find myself rewatching in isolation even multiple times a year. It is simply a masterpiece. And that concludes my review of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. I truly hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, be sure to leave a like, and if you really do, subscribe and get notified whenever a new video goes up. I look forward to reading your opinions about Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy in the comment section. And do let me know if there is a movie you would like me to review. That is all I have to speak of today. A goodbye.